Harry, I'm glad I caught you, Percy said eagerly, springing up as Harry descended the dormitory staircase first thing the next morning. Given you appeared to be waiting for me, that's not really all that surprising, Harry said yawning. Still, at least you didn't try waking me up this time. Yes, well, I wanted to ask you what the hell you thought you were doing? Going down to breakfast, Harry suggested. Not right now, Percy said impatiently. Last night. Weren't you there? Harry asked innocently. No, I was busy, Percy said, looking a little embarrassed. With Penelope? Harry smirked. That is none of your concern, Harry, Percy said stiffly, his ears reddening. I'm just teasing, Percy, I'm glad you have a girlfriend, Harry said sincerely. Thank you, Percy gave Harry a small smile. I'm going to be honest with you, you're a huge disruptive influence and I'm fairly certain that I should at the very least dislike you. For some reason, I don't. Mum seems determined to make you a part of our family, as do Ron and the twins. You yourself don't seem all that opposed to the idea. As such, it always unnerves me when you do things like this and either put yourself in danger from vigilantes who want to stop you because they think you're the heir of Slytherin now or just outright hate you. I appreciate that, Percy, Harry told him. I'm not trying to worry anyone, I just think I know what I'm doing. You think? Percy repeated faintly. You think? Now I'm even more worried. You're a parcel mouth, Hermione exclaimed as Ron and Neville shoved Harry into an empty classroom. Harry really didn't want to have this conversation, now or ever, but he was thankful his friends at least had the sense to make sure he wasn't overheard. So I announced last night, Harry said neutrally. Why didn't you tell us? Ron demanded, upset. He seemed to be even more worked up than he was last time, although it had been a while so Harry wasn't positive. Perhaps it was because last time even though Harry's unexpected ability was the same, this time Harry had known about it, what it was called, and exactly what being a parcel mouth implied so it was more like he had been deliberately keeping this from them. That was all true, but Harry didn't think Ron would appreciate if Harry told him that he didn't feel like dealing with the hassle of telling him and having to worry about Ron keeping something this big under wraps. Ron would never purposely expose his secret, but he was also about as subtle as Voldemort, if less violent. Everyone always freaks out when they hear about it, Harry explained. And really, how often does the subject of talking to snakes come up in daily conversation? You'd think it would be something you might want to mention when there has been a basilisk going around petrifying people for the last few weeks, Neville sounded a little annoyed. I know, Harry agreed wearily. But it really isn't that big of a deal. I haven't been anywhere near the basilisk and aside from occasionally hearing it moaning about how it wants to kill people as it rushes past me, I haven't seen any indication of her presence. Her? Ron repeated. As Harry opened his mouth to explain, he shook his head. It doesn't matter. Don't you think that the constant petrifactions might count as a sign of the basilisk's presence? Neville asked rhetorically. This is a huge deal. Hermione insisted heatedly. Being a parcel mouth is what Salazar Slytherin was most famous for dash. Well, that and his being a pureblood fanatic, Neville muttered to Ron, who grinned. Now the whole school is going to think you're his ancestor. Ron cried. Harry stared at him. Why would they go and think a silly thing like that for? Because it won't occur to them that it's possible to be a parcel mouth and not related to him as parcel mouths are so rare. Neville put forth tentatively. I bet they're not nearly as rare as everyone makes them out to be and anyone who doesn't want to get saddled with the label of dark wizard in training, which, true or not, would definitely be a bit of a setback, would make sure to keep that ability hidden, Harry disagreed. And that wasn't what I meant anyway. What did you mean? Neville asked, confused. I meant that unless they're all a bunch of morons Harry began. Which you have a tendency to think anyway, Hermione cut him off. True, but unless they are even more hopeless than I had originally thought, they would not think that I am his ancestor, but rather his descendant, Harry finished. Unless they subscribe to some crazy time-traveling theory where I am my own great-ancestor or something. Kind of like the conspiracy theories in the Quibbler that you and Luna believe? Hermione asked innocently. Of course not, Hermione, Harry scoffed. Everyone knows you can't be your own ancestor. Really? Hermione asked, wondering how that was any more far-fetched than some of the other things she'd heard Harry, Luna, and occasionally Ron, curse him for winning that lifetime subscription, debating. How so? It's all about genes, Hermione, Harry began patiently. I don't expect you to know much about them, but you know what DNA is, right? Hermione nodded even as Ron and Neville started to look lost. Well, if you have a child, that child will have half of your genes, and by the same principle if you have any grandchildren they will have roughly a quarter of your genes, Harry continued. The likelihood of you contributing exactly the right half of your genes in order to match with the genes your partner is contributing is so low that the odds aren't even worth calculating. That makes it virtually impossible for you to be your own child or grandchild, although the probability does go up slightly after each generation. In any event, it would be a case of incest and your family would be stuck in constant cycle if you went back in time and lived the rest of your life in the past. In my case, I also have the benefit of knowing that Salazar Slytherin is an established person, so even if no such person were to exist, I wouldn't choose that as a pseudonym. In fact, seeing as how it was over 1,000 years ago, I probably wouldn't bother with a pseudonym at all. I'm not quite sure I follow all of that, Hermione admitted. The girl was brilliant, but she was also only 12. You don't have to, Harry assured her. Just know that I'm right. That's a dangerous precedent to set, Hermione told him seriously. Then don't have this be precedent, just this once, Harry said. That's how all these things start, Hermione countered. If you're not his descendant, Neville put extra emphasis on the disputed word so as not to have to endure any more of Harry's attempts to clarify, then how can you speak Parseltongue? Or do you not know? I inherited it from Voldemort and he's a descendant of Slytherin, Harry said casually. You're descended from you-know-who? Ron shouted, shocked and horrified. Of course not, Harry said, looking sick. Can you imagine the likes of him reproducing? That's the stuff of nightmares, right there. But you just said Neville protested. What, so now I can't inherit something from someone I'm not related to? Harry demanded indignantly. Generally no, Hermione told him. Except if you're talking about Gringotts, but even then most people are related to each other anyway. As Harry continues to point out, Ron said, a little bitterly. Only when Draco's around, Harry said defensively. And besides, if you're going to be all nitpicky, then I'm not technically a Parselmouth. You can talk to snakes. That makes you a Parselmouth, Neville said bluntly. Oh, anyone can talk to snakes, Harry said dismissively. It's getting them to answer back that's the trick. But anyway, my scar, which I got from that killing curse Voldemort shot at me, is a Parselmouth. If I were to ever lose it, I would be completely unable to interact with British serpents. How could you possibly know that? Hermione demanded. Better questions, how could you lose a scar? Easy. Kill Voldemort, Harry said shortly. You're not making any sense. Again, Ron added as an afterthought. Whatever, Harry said, exiting the classroom and being almost immediately set upon by a small crowd of overeager Slytherins, all of them holding a snake. You guys go on without me, I might be a while. Oi! Harry! Fred called out. We wanted to let you know, George continued. How impressed we were with your little stunt at the dueling club meeting. And we hope that you continue to always be around to inspire equal Ronnikins to follow in your and thus our footsteps as a first-class prankster, master manipulator, and brilliant businessman. Harry stared at the Weasley twins who smiled back at him innocently. He wasn't fooled for a second. One of these days you've got to teach me that spell. What spell? They chorused simultaneously. Oh come on, I'll do anything. Harry offered. Sorry Harry. We'd love to help you. We really would. But we have no idea what you are talking about or what you're smoking, but we're starting to think we'd like to try some. I'll give you a startup loan on your joke shop, Harry promised. Fred and George exchanged glances. Do that and we'll talk. Justin. Ernie hissed urgently. What are you doing here? Justin, who had been working on a herbology project with Harry, looked apologetically at him before going over to where Ernie was trying and failing miserably to look inconspicuous behind a bookshelf. Harry himself waved merrily to Susan Bones and Hannah Abbott, who looked vaguely uncomfortable as they waved back and then returned to pretending not to listen to what Ernie and Justin were discussing. I'm studying, Justin said simply. With Harry Potter? Ernie was appalled. Really? I hadn't noticed. I probably should have guessed when he kept chatting about his scar and translated 3 separate conversations for a Slytherin and 2 Ravenclaws, Justin said sarcastically. You know what I mean, Ernie said impatiently. I told you to hide in the common room. So you did, Justin acknowledged. Then why aren't you? Ernie demanded. Because I had a project to do, Justin replied. You could have done it in the common room, Ernie said sternly. It was a partner project and Harry's not in Hufflepuff, Justin pointed out. Besides, letting him into the common room kind of defeats the purpose of hiding up there, doesn't it? Why are you working with Potter, anyway? Ernie had taken to calling Harry by his surname once he decided that Harry was secretly evil after all. Well, not secretly per se, but rather blatantly evil. In fact, Harry was delighted that everyone who thought he was the heir was referring to him as Potter and everyone else called him Harry, at his insistence as he had some bad memories of people who hated him calling him Potter before making his life hell, because that way it was very easy to differentiate the mindless sheep who believed him from the mindless sheep who were ruled by fear. He supposed he really shouldn't think of the roughly 3/4 of the school who stood by him as mindless sheep, but he knew from past experience that they were only responding to his explanations and assistance in reviving the basilisk victims. It's not like we got to choose our partners, Justin said, rolling his eyes. You know that, you're paired up with Lavender Brown. You should have explained the situation to Professor Sprout. Ernie began. What situation? Justin interrupted. The situation of Potter being the heir of Slytherin and attacking people for the hell of it and curing them for the publicity and to throw people off his track, Ernie replied matter-of-factly. Even if you were right, he has to work with someone, and unless you think that a half-blood like him with a muggle-born best friend is a pure-blood fanatic, everyone is at risk, Justin said reasonably. I'd still rather my best friend didn't insist on endangering himself trying to be all noble and Gryffindor, Ernie muttered sourly. That was uncalled for, Justin said, shuddering at the comparison. I know, Ernie said, looking sheepish. I'm sorry. Harry's always been so nice though, Hannah said uncertainly, giving up all pretense of ignoring the two boys. And he made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all bad, can he? No one knows how he survived that attack by you-know-who, Ernie said, lowering his voice dramatically. You-know-who cast a killing curse at him. No one survives a killing curse, let alone a baby. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have possibly lived to tell the tale. I'm pretty sure Harry made some big announcement sometime last year about surviving because his mother sacrificed herself for him, Susan pointed out. Had he done that? Harry really didn't remember. Still, if he had, then that could only work in his favor in swaying more sheep. Oh come on, he was a baby, what does he know about it? Ernie scoffed. I completely agree, Susan said pointedly. He was only a baby. How could he possibly be so evil that you-know-who himself had to come straight over and kill him? How would he even know that Harry was a devil child at that age? Well... Ernie trailed off, realizing that she had a valid point. I still don't buy the whole mother sacrificing theory. I mean, is Lily Potter really the only person to have ever given their lives for someone ever? She can't be. How in the world is Potter the only one to survive? Maybe he's the chosen one, Justin snared. Harry nearly choked. That wasn't too far off, actually, although hopefully that could be kept quiet for a few more years. But Ernie tried again. Just give it up, Ernie, Susan advised. Fine. Don't come crying to me when Potter petrifies you all, Ernie sniffed and began to storm away. If anything, he'd come after you for smearing his name, Susan called after him. Ernie's shoulders stiffened and he started walking faster. If Harry did that, wouldn't everyone be suspicious of him again? Hannah asked. Justin shrugged. Probably. On the other hand, there's no need to tell Ernie that. And maybe now I can get back to my homework. Potter, McGonagall's voice rang out through the suddenly silent library several hours later. Yes? Harry asked politely. Has someone else been petrified? Indeed. Ernie Macmillan has been found right outside the Hufflepuff common room, McGonagall told him gravely. I see, Harry trailed off as something occurred to him. Mr. Potter? McGonagall prompted. I have an alibi. Harry cheered, ignoring the death glare Madame Pince sent his way. Pardon? McGonagall asked, not understanding. Ever since that whole stunt I pulled at the dueling club, some people, Ernie being one of the most vocal, have been accusing me of attacking everyone. I never seem to have an alibi, but this time I was in here studying the whole time and have, 30 witnesses, Harry continued excitedly. Be that as it may, McGonagall said primly. A student was still petrified. Oh, he'll be fine, Harry said dismissively as he followed the Transfiguration professor up to the hospital wing. That may be true, but I would like to remind you that there is still a murderous creature on the loose and it would not behove you to be so glib, McGonagall said sternly. I know, Harry said. He glanced down at Ernie. Hey! I sold him that mirror. And he still blames me. That little... Harry, Dumbledore interrupted him. Hello, Professor, Harry said warmly. What are you doing here? I'm always concerned when there is a basilisk attacking my students, Dumbledore explained. That sounds like a good policy, Harry nodded. You have been almost extraordinarily helpful during this crisis, and I suspect that you are somehow involved in the Iron Curtain of secrecy protecting Hogwarts' problems from the wizarding world at large, Dumbledore said pleasantly. I do what I can, Harry said, his voice noncommittal. Let me begin by saying that I know that you have nothing to do with these attacks. However, I am quite curious, how do you know so much about the attacks? Dumbledore's eyes bore into him and Harry was suddenly quite grateful Hermione had bullied him into mastering a Clumency when they were 19. Well, she and all of his other friends were 20, but he had a late birthday. I've come back from the future, Harry deadpanned. Indeed, Dumbledore said, skeptical but intrigued. Oh yes, Harry nodded. Of course, when I'm from Ginny Weasley had the diary and was attacking only Muggleborns, Sirius Black was completely innocent of the crimes he was sent to Azkaban for, without a trial, and escaped next year. Draco Malfoy is the master of the Elder Wand, and Snape helps euthanize you. Indeed, Dumbledore said again, this time blatant disbelief evident in his voice. How did you come back, if you don't mind me asking? Drapery accident, Harry said shortly. It was very traumatic. Dumbledore sighed heavily. I wish you would be honest with me, Harry. Who says I'm not being honest? Harry asked rhetorically. But you can be assured that anything I'm not telling you is either for a very good reason, because I don't think it's relevant, or just because I don't want to deal with the consequences. That's rather discouraging, Harry, Dumbledore told him frankly. I don't know what else to tell you, Harry said shrugging. How about the truth? Dumbledore suggested. The truth, Harry sighed, mimicking Dumbledore's response to Harry's plea for the truth in his first year. It is a beautiful and terrible thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution. That is most unhelpful and I suspect deliberately cryptic, Dumbledore told him, sounding a little disappointed. Well, if it is it's probably because I got that from a reticent and secretive to a fault old man, Harry said, grinning. If you should decide in the future to confide in me, my office is always open, Dumbledore told him sincerely. Thanks, Professor, Harry said, touched. I appreciate that. Chapter 20. So, Hermione said triumphantly the day before the term ended. We're not the only ones to think Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin. Yeah, ever since you had a bunch of witnesses when Ernie was attacked, everyone has been off your case and on his, Ron chimed in. It's really quite fortunate that nobody realizes I could have just ordered the basilisk to attack him beforehand, Harry mused. His three friends stared at him. But, you didn't, right Harry? Neville asked finally. Of course not, Harry scoffed. But the point is that I could have. I recommend keeping that bit of information to yourself, Neville advised. Or else people will never let go of the idea that you're responsible. Not that I don't fully support the idea that Malfoy is the heir, Ron began. But Harry, you're his friend, Merlin knows why, and shouldn't you be doing something to make people stop suspecting him? Harry grinned. That was a strange situation, all right. Normally, I would, he agreed. On the other hand, Draco is a Slytherin from an old dark pureblood family. To him, being the heir of Slytherin is a badge of pride and so even though he's not responsible, he doesn't mind people thinking he is. What's more, he's the one who came to me with the idea of making everyone think he's the heir and I went along with it because the truth will come out soon enough and the teachers totally don't believe him anyway, so it's not like it really does any harm. If that's the case, why are you so sure he's not? Hermione asked reasonably. Or, as reasonably as one could be when espousing the theory that Draco Malfoy was the heir of Slytherin. He could be playing you and just asking for help in taking the credit that he already deserves. You mean other than the fact that he's 12, not a Parselmouth, and thinks being able to attack people with a giant snake is wicked? Harry asked. Seriously, even Voldemort didn't go around setting the basilisk on Muggleborns until he was 16. Ron flinched. Stop saying that, he said, annoyed. Stop telling me not to say that, Harry shot back. It's not going to do any good and getting into another argument about this with you will just make everything take twice as long. The fact that we're talking to you automatically makes everything take twice as long as it normally would, Neville pointed out. Then perhaps one should not be so eager to make everything take 4 times as long as it normally would, Harry said mildly. But that reminds me, I've got your polyjuice. Now go away and don't try to drag me into this. Hermione woke them up at the crack of dawn on Christmas morning, proving that she was indeed sadistic enough to be the daughter of dentists. You have 5 seconds to tell me what you're doing in here before I hex you, Harry growled sleepily. He and the rest of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, plus Lee, had just had their monthly all-night tournament. This time it was Exploding Snap and since they wouldn't have Quidditch practice the next morning, would joined in for once. It was great fun, naturally, but unless Hermione had a good reason to be barging in there 20 minutes after he had fallen asleep. The Polyjuice potion is ready. Hermione exclaimed excitedly, bouncing up and down on the balls of her feet. Of course it's ready, Harry snapped, not a morning person under the best of circumstances. I gave it to you last week. Well, yes, Hermione admitted. But I thought we could use it today. Breakfast isn't for another 3 hours. How could we possibly hope to use it before then? Harry demanded. Then, realizing his mistake, he corrected, and by we I mean you. I still think this is stupid. I think half the things that you do are stupid. Hermione began heatedly. Only half. Ron muttered, covering his head with a pillow to block out the sunlight. Maybe she just doesn't pay enough attention, Neville murmured back, copying Ron's method of refusing to admit it was morning. But that doesn't mean I try to stop you. Hermione concluded. Since when have I been trying to stop you? Harry asked incredulously. I bought you the bloody potion. And let me tell you, that did not come cheap. And I'm sure you made the money back within 24 hours, Hermione said dismissively. Besides, you only helped so we wouldn't endanger our potions class. Oh please, Harry laughed. Like I couldn't have stopped that. The only reason it would have worked on Snape was because he didn't know you were planning it and would have undoubtedly have been busy with the other kids who were trying to kill each other. Right then, Hedwig flew in and dropped a medium-sized package on Harry's head. Ouch. Okay, that's it, Harry said determinedly. I don't care what day it is just too damn early. Out, all of you. But Harry. Hermione protested. The potion dash. Out. Harry shouted, waving his mind and banishing Hermione down the stairs. Thanks for that, mate, Ron said, snuggling deeper into his pillow. What part about all of you didn't you get? Harry asked, raising his wand again. But Neville began, horrified. Sorry, Harry said apologetically. But she won't stop until you guys go help her with that. It's good to know where your priorities lie, Ron muttered as he reluctantly got up. Yeah, well, I need sleep, Harry told him. Oh, but take this. Harry waved his wand at his trunk and a vial with a few hairs floated out and into Ron's empty hands. What's this? Ron asked, inspecting it carefully. A few of Pansy Parkinson's hairs, Harry explained. Tell Hermione that Polyjuice potion should not be used with cat hair. How did you? Neville began. Wait, don't answer that. Your scar told you, he said sarcastically. You know me too well, Harry said as he waved his wand once more to shut the curtains and went back to sleep. When Harry finally got around to getting up and opening his presents, he found that the Dursleys had actually sent individual presents. Uncle Vernon had sent him a cross and a note saying how he was going to hell for worshipping Satan and proving that once again he knew nothing about magic. Aunt Petunia had sent a book on gardening which he immediately gave to Neville, and Dudley got him a bunch of CDs which, due to the lack of electricity at Hogwarts and his own lack of a CD player, Harry strung up and hung around the common room, creating a cool rainbow effect when the light hit them. Harry had sent Aunt Petunia some rare but muggle seedlings, Dudley some magical sweets that would probably freak him out for about 20 minutes before he gave in and ate them all within the day, and Uncle Vernon 20 galleons so as to torture his uncle with the dilemma of exchanging his wizarding coins for muggle money or not accepting free money. This would probably agonize him for days. Hagrid sent him a large tin of treacle fudge and Harry had sent him 6 Abraxan. Harry had decided pretty early on that he was going to celebrate the success of his money-making ventures by going all out this Christmas. Ron gave him Flying with the Cannons, which was an interesting enough read even if he despised that team. In turn, Harry had sent him a new wand. Hermione got him a luxury eagle-feathered quill and Harry, so help him, gave her a time turner. Fortunately, he also gave her a guide on how to use it, straight from the Department of Mysteries itself. It really was nice sometimes that the Ministry was so corruptible as Harry was almost certain that what he did was worth a good 10 years in Azkaban. The Weasleys had sent Harry a new hand-knitted jumper and a plum cake and Harry had responded by purchasing them a house elf, something he was not looking forward to Hermione finding out about. It's not like he wasn't all for house elf rights, it was just that Dobby was the only house elf he had actually met who wanted them and he figured he should probably stay away from enacting new magical creature legislation until he had at least graduated. Things like that were very time-consuming, as he knew from experience. And the Weasleys were in Egypt visiting Bill for Christmas. If they could afford that, then why was it such a big deal that they won the 1,000 galleon draw over the summer and went back? Maybe it was cheaper when it was just the 2 of them and not 7 of them. Ginny had gotten him some owl treats for Hedwig and he had gotten her a year's supply of Honeydukes chocolate because he didn't know her as well as he might have liked. Fred and George had sent him several seemingly innocuous desserts that he was afraid to try without a lengthy examination and a possible guinea pig and he had gotten them a book on inventing potions. He knew they could do it on their own, but this might make things go a little smoother. Tonks had sent him some of Sirius's old school books that he and Harry's father had written all over when they were supposed to be listening in class and Harry had gotten her a rather expensive ring charmed with an anti-clumsiness spell for when she needed to be undercover once she finally got through aura training. Technically, he supposed she could wear it all the time, but he knew that Tonks had kind of liked being clumsy for whatever reason. Maybe she just saw it as integral to her personality. Percy had gotten him a book on the owls, which was just so typically Percy that it wasn't even funny and Harry had gotten him a set of new school robes as Harry knew pomp like that was important to Percy. Neville had gotten him a book on poltergeists as apparently Harry was starting to remind him of one, and dear God he was getting a lot of books. He could really sympathize with the headmaster's desire for a pair of nicely woolen socks now and resolved to purchase some for himself at the earliest possible opportunity, and Harry had gotten him a couple gillyweed plants. Not that he was thinking ahead to 4th year or anything. Cedric had gotten him a book of 1,000 things I never had the nerve to do at Hogwarts and a note remarking that Harry had already done 3 dozen. Needless to say, Harry now had a new ambition in life. Harry himself had sent Cedric a book on the history of the Triwizard Tournament complete with task analysis and a note saying, "You never know. But my scar does." Draco had gotten him a top-of-the-line broomstick serving kit and Harry had gotten him the most extensive wizard genealogy in all of Europe. That probably wasn't the best plan if he wanted Draco to get over all of that pure blood crap he kept spouting, but he knew Draco would love it and it was Christmas. Luna had gotten him a pair of X-ray glasses that genuinely worked and looked just like his regular glasses so he knew he'd have fun with being able to look even more omniscient than usual. It made him very glad he had hired 2 dozen experienced trackers to find her a crumple-horned snorkack, which turned out to be some sort of pig-like creature. He knew that would just make her day. He got Professor Dumbledore a pair of woolly mittens to go with his woolly socks, Professor Lockhart a book on calligraphy so he could have fun making his signature even more elaborate, an anonymous grant for Professor Snape to continue doing research, and Professor McGonagall a brand new chess set, also anonymously. And of course, he sent the entire Hogwarts population a candy cane and everyone who had expressed faith in him a box full of chocolate. By the time Harry was finished admiring his presents and deigned to leave the common room, it was lunchtime and Harry was just in time for a quick bite to eat before he joined the traditional all-afternoon snowball fight. By the time that ended, it was dinner and Ron, Hermione, and Neville were getting up halfway through the meal to go chasing after Crabbe and Goyle. "Feel free to just ditch me, it's okay, I don't mind," Harry called after them. "If you don't mind then why are you yelling at them?" Luna asked sitting down across from him and plopping his gift down next to her. "I like yelling." "I'm sure you do, you make all school announcements in the Great Hall often enough." "Thank you for Norbert," Luna said breezily. Norbert," Harry repeated. "Like the dragon?" Well, that was really a Norberta, but he wasn't supposed to know that yet. What were the odds that she would pick the same name as Hagrid? Although somehow he wasn't surprised. "Oh yes," Luna said serenely. "I asked Hagrid about name suggestions and he got a little teary-eyed when Norbert came up, so I figured that would be a good name." "That's just, yeah," Harry said, not exactly eloquently. "Strange," Luna supplied. "Yeah, I get that LOT. For that matter, don't you? She asked. I do, Harry nodded. What do you think about the theory that Draco Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin? That's ridiculous, Luna said instantly. He would never write in a diary. Diary? So that means that you believe me about a supposedly dead parent betrayer illegal rat Animagus using Voldemort's old diary to open the Chamber of Secrets? Harry asked, interested. No one had taken that part of his story seriously, even if they did believe him about the basilisk. Of course, Luna nodded sagely. It makes perfect sense. Not to everyone else, Harry pointed out. Most people don't believe in Norbert either, Luna countered. Although they will after he makes the front page of the next issue of the Quibbler. Do you ever get frustrated in your attempt to educate the sheer, wizarding world? Harry asked curiously. Luna giggled at his near slip-up. Sometimes. But if we don't do it, who will? Everyone else is just content to be stagnant for the rest of their lives and live lives almost identical to their ancestors and their descendants. Do you know which is which? Harry asked her, realizing that the question wasn't very clear and he should probably elaborate. Before he could do that though, Luna answered. It is truly sad the state of the world when so many people don't realize that ancestors are those who came before and descendants are those who come after, Luna said, shaking her head pityingly. Where did your friends go? It was strange, but Harry and Luna never really felt the need to use transitional phrases, they just abruptly changed the subject and the other one was expected to keep up. Again, very strange, but it worked for them. They are off to go drug Crabbe and Goyle in order to impersonate them and Pansy Parkinson so they can go sneak into the Slytherin common room and try to worm a confession out of Draco, Harry explained. Drugging students? Couldn't they get expelled for that? Luna asked, interested. Probably, Harry acknowledged. Come to think of it, why hadn't Crabbe and Goyle gone to Dumbledore in the first place? Was it because they were embarrassed or didn't know who had drugged them? Was it because they didn't like the most prominent champion of Muggle rights or had they simply not noticed they had been drugged? Sure, they could have thought they had fallen asleep, but he and Ron had taken their clothes and locked them in a closet. Although they could probably also get expelled from deliberately causing an explosion in potions class, which they were planning to do so they could steal from Snape, another offense, until I stepped in and just bought them the damn potion. Polyjuice, right? Luna asked. At Harry's nod, she continued, wouldn't Draco Malfoy admit it because he wants people to think he is? Harry's blood froze. That had honestly never occurred to me. So I guess you'll get a pretty interesting debriefing when they come back, Luna smiled. Yeah. And they will be even harder to convince of Draco's innocence than Ernie is of mine. What I really don't understand is this, even if the heir was a student and a Slytherin, which is actually a reasonable assumption given the name, unless they were planning this from the beginning and wanted to deflect suspicion, why are they suspecting a second year? They should be looking for a culprit amongst the upperclassmen, Luna said sensibly. It had also amazed him just how sensible Luna could be sometimes. He had remembered her as the most bizarre person he knew, which was still true, but he supposed that since the wizarding world practically had a logic phobia and Luna was so very different than the mainstream wizard, it was almost inevitable that she would have to be. Simple, Harry laughed. He's the only Slytherin they interact with on any kind of regular basis and he doesn't like them. Well, he's okay with Neville, but then, Neville is a pureblood who doesn't buy Ron and Hermione's theory that he's the heir and is really just going along to keep them out of trouble. Ron thinks all Slytherins are evil and the Weasleys and Malfoy seem to have some sort of blood feud going on anyway. Hermione is a Muggleborn and Draco really doesn't have very much experience with them, and so there are definite problems there. Plus he can't stand anyone who is so obviously smarter than him. I see, Luna said. That really makes no sense, though. Harry sighed. Preaching to the choir, Luna, preaching to the choir. Chapter 21. Oh, and I'd like to thank everyone that reviewed. Over 1,000 reviews in only 20 chapters, you people are great. That night Ron and Hermione rushed into the common room half an hour after curfew, their eyes sparkling, with Neville trailing behind, looking rather disconcerted. So, Harry began, genuinely curious. How did it go? It went great. Ron enthused. Little bugger confessed to everything. I'm still not sure that it was Neville began, only to be cut off by Hermione. Oh come on Neville, you were there. You heard him. What more proof do you need? Hermione asked him, exasperated. Clearly this had been an ongoing discussion between them on the way back. Oh I don't know, some proof? Neville suggested sarcastically. I admit that what we've heard is damning and I wouldn't put it past Malfoy to try something like this but still. He's 12. And it's not like he's exactly criminal mastermind material either. Maybe you guys should start from the beginning, Harry proposed. And I can be the fair and unbiased judge. Fair and unbiased. Ron snorted. You like Malfoy, remember? I like you more, Harry retorted, rolling his eyes. Although Draco is less prone to jumping to conclusions. No one says jumping to conclusions anymore, Parvati said as she walked past them on her way to the girls' dormitory. Yeah, everyone knows it's skydiving, Lavender added, hurrying after her friend. Once they left, Harry and his friends were the only people left in the common room and they could begin their tale. We got off to kind of a late start because Ron insisted that I use some of Pansy's hair that you apparently just happened to have with you instead of Millicent's, despite the fact that Millicent was staying over break and Pansy wasn't, Hermione began, glaring slightly at Ron for inconveniencing her. Hey, don't look at me, Ron said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. It was Harry's idea, and if Harry said that the Hesuad belonged to Millicent's cat, then it's best not to take chances. Besides, it's not like Malfoy even noticed that you weren't supposed to be there. That is true. Hermione mused. I don't think he likes her very much. And who can blame her? Ron laughed. Malfoy's a GIT. She said Draco didn't like Pansy, not vice versa, Harry corrected, somewhat reluctant to break the flow of their narrative lest they get sidetracked, and this ended up taking all night. Oh. Well, he's still a GIT, Ron said. He dash. Regardless of whether or not Hermione needed to use Pansy's hair or what Malfoy and Pansy feel for each other, Neville interjected pointedly. We soon realized we had no idea where the Slytherin common room was. Why didn't you just ask me? Harry asked. Why would you know where the Slytherin common room is? Hermione asked. Because Draco is a friend of mine? Harry offered. Harry, do you remember that little conversation you had with Malfoy at the end of last year about stalking? She asked sweetly. Nope, not at all, Harry lied. You were saying, Neville. Right. We hadn't thought to ask you, although I realized that you would probably know because you're obsessive like that, and there really wasn't enough time for us to go back, find you, and then interrogate Malfoy. Considering I hadn't moved and you had an entire bloody castle to look through, I'm not so sure about that, Harry disagreed. How are we supposed to know you were planning to stay in the Great Hall? Ron asked rhetorically. We saw Luna coming up to talk to you, and she might very well have convinced you to go visit those invisible zombie horses she keeps going on about. They're called Thestrals, Ron, Harry said stiffly. And everyone knows the best time to visit them is at daybreak. I've been meaning to ask you about that, actually, mate, Ron continued. I mean, I know that you both say that you can see them, but neither of you is quite right in the head, and as nobody else seems to be able to, how do we know that you're not just seeing things? Or making them up? Harry groaned. Great. Only 2 years in and I'm already being accused of being a lying schizophrenic. It's nice to know some things never change. What? Hermione asked, looking vaguely disturbed by Harry's implication that he'd been accused of having mental problems before. Oh, nothing, Harry said dismissively, deciding against mentioning his psychic scar for once. And of course Luna and I aren't the only ones who can see Thestrals. I know for sure that Theodore not can see them, as well as most of the adults. Well, not so Slytherin, ain't he? Ron shrugged. None of them are right in the head. And don't you think the adults would have mentioned something if they had invisible zombie horses pulling the carriages? Not to mention why in the world they would have such bad omens working here when they could just enchant the carriages to pull themselves, Hermione added. Plus it would be cheaper and less maintenance. That would be the sensible course of action, wouldn't it? Harry agreed cheerfully. Which is why it has never occurred to any of them. Ever. Luna and Harry aren't the only ones who can see Thestrals, Neville said quietly. You mean you can? Ron asked, looking concerned. At Neville's reluctant nod, he began pulling him towards the door. We'd better get you to Madame Pomfrey. I can't believe I didn't notice anything was off with you. You must think I'm the worst friend ever. Oh well, hopefully this is just because of stress dash. I'm not hallucinating, Ron, Neville told him, sounding faintly amused. No, you're just seeing invisible zombie horses, Ron countered. You don't believe in Thestrals, Ron. That's funny, I could have sworn I heard Harry say something about them being in the Quibbler, Hermione sniped. Harry, who had been feeling ignored, opened his mouth to say that he had said no such thing because Thestrals, despite how invisible, zombie-ish, and horse-like they were, just didn't make very interesting news. Particularly as anyone who had made it through O.W.L.S. Care of Magical Creatures could tell you that they were real. Before he could get a word in edgewise, however, Ron continued. I don't believe everything in the Quibbler, Hermione. Could have fooled me. I just don't see how invisible, zombie horses are any harder to believe in than, say, the Rotfang conspiracy, Hermione shot back. I knew it. Harry burst out. All this time you've been looking down at us for reading the Quibbler, but you read it too. I have proof. Ron, Hermione, and Neville just stared at him. Shutting up now. Thestrals are real, Neville took advantage of the silence Harry's abrupt outburst had caused. You can only see them if you've seen death, however, so not many people our age know about them. I'd hazard a guess that most of the staff would be able to see them, especially given the war. How can Harry see them? Hermione asked. Surely he would have mentioned it if he'd seen someone die. Harry vaguely wondered why it was more surprising that he'd seen death than Neville. All things considering, she should think the opposite. Oh, Hermione? I did tell you. Quirrell, remember? Neville and I both saw it. But I could see them before. I saw my parents die. There was a silence. Then, when you were one, mate, Ron pointed out, with all the tact of a blind troll. Harry rolled his eyes. So? I still saw it. But you couldn't possibly have let their deaths and the implications sink in at that age, and so there is no way that could have allowed you to see Thestrals, Ron replied. I thought you didn't believe in Thestrals, Hermione said, a little smugly. I didn't. I grew up in a wizarding home, though, so I've still heard about them. Charlie loves exotic creatures like that, Ron explained. If your brother told you about them, why didn't you believe in them? Neville wanted to know. Because it sounds like something out of those bad Muggle horror movies Dad sometimes watches, Ron admitted. He loves the TV. TV, Ron, Harry corrected automatically. That was interesting. If Ron's father's primary source of Muggle knowledge came from cable, that would explain a lot. Anyway, we've somehow gotten horribly off topic so, again, finding the Slytherin common rooms, Neville said pointedly. We ran into this girl and I tried asking where the Slytherin common rooms were dash. But I stopped him, Hermione interrupted. Because I recognized her as the Ravenclaw prefect Penelope Clearwater, and even though people might believe Crabbe and Goyle were stupid enough to forget where their common room was, Penelope wouldn't be able to help. You know, you'd think that prefects would know where the other common rooms are in case of emergencies, Harry mused. Come to think of it, why in the world are the common rooms hidden and passwords set up? Unless they feel that Polyjuice Potion or Metamorphogases are enough of a problem to warrant the extra secrecy, couldn't the portraits just visually ID anyone and maybe putting passwords on the dormitories? And for that matter, how is it fair that just because the Ravenclaws are the most studious, they should have to answer some bizarre and abstract riddle every time they want to leave their common room? I mean honestly, one wrong answer and you're stuck outside. It's a wonder anyone wants to be a Ravenclaw at all. Yeah, that's great Harry, Neville told him. Not sure I want to know where you're getting your information, but try to stay focused. Oh, that's rich coming from you. You haven't even gotten to the Slytherin common room and we've been talking for over 10 minutes, Harry retorted. I'm staying on topic just fine, Neville said defensively. It's Ron and Hermione who won't stop bickering. Casting a quick glance at the twin looks of indignation on the faces of the pair in question, he quickly pressed forth. After Penelope left, we ran into Percy and Ron may or may not have started a blood feud between the House of Crabbe and the House of Weasley. That is so not my fault. Ron protested. Harry shot him a look. He didn't know what happened but he was fairly sure that whatever Ron had said had been entirely his own fault as that was the way these things tended to work. Also, he was beginning to wish that he had gone with them after all, if for no other reason than so he could already know what happened instead of having this drag on. Almost, but not quite. After all, he and Luna had had fun. Still, this was taking quite a while. Perhaps he should look into getting a pensive. Okay, it might have been slightly my fault, Ron relented, flushing. But how was I supposed to know that he'd take such offense to my teasing him about Penelope? Oh, I don't know, Hermione said sarcastically. Because you weren't his brother but some random troll like second year and weren't sounding like you respected his authority. But I don't Ron began. And you're his brother, so that's okay, Neville told him. But coming from Crabbe, you know how seriously Percy takes his prefect status. Yeah. Ron grumbled. At least you seem to enjoy blood feuds, Harry tried to console him. Ron looked perplexed. Oh come on, I've seen how much you enjoy bantering with Draco. In fact, I think I'll keep a close eye on you too when you start going through puberty, just to make sure all of this isn't just USD. Hermione, clearly the only one to understand the acronym, giggled. Ron opened his mouth angrily to demand clarification but Neville just shook his head and put a hand over Ron's mouth. We're probably better off not knowing, he said seriously. Ron seemed to agree. Right after Percy stormed off, Malfoy showed up. He took us down to the dungeons, which is apparently where the Slytherin common room is and I gotta say, sucks to be them, especially this time of year. Malfoy mocked us for forgetting where the common room was and then immediately proceeded to not remember the password. Hermione told him what it was and dash. Wait, Harry interrupted, grinning. Hermione Granger, Gryffindor Golden Girl, told Draco Malfoy, Slytherin bad boy, the password to his common room. What were we talking about earlier about stalking? Oh, so now you remember that, Hermione rolled her eyes. Typical. And I just suggested pureblood because it's Slytherin and it was the first thing that came to mind. She paused. Well, after Basilisk but under the circumstances, I didn't think Professor Dumbledore would let them get away with being so gauche. The minute we were in the common room, Malfoy, who seems to enjoy his blood feud with the Weasleys nearly as much as Ron does, began to talk about how much a disgrace he thought they were and how Mr. Weasley should go off and become a Muggle. Then he mentioned that the reason he was so upset was that Mr. Weasley had conducted a raid of his house a little while back and even though they hadn't found anything, there were apparently several dark artifacts hidden in the Malfoys' drawing room. Not for long, I sent a letter to Dad, Ron said, sounding extremely pleased with himself. So? Harry asked. Even if he knows that the Malfoys are hiding something, he can't very well act on it. Why not? Ron asked. He can just go back and raid Malfoy Manor again. No he can't, Ron, Harry said, shaking his head. A raid once when other houses were being raided might be okay. To go back, though, you'd need evidence. But I do have evidence. I heard dash. That's all very well and good, Ron, Harry said patiently. Even if you completely ignore the fact that all of this is hearsay, how are you going to explain how you got the information? Are you going to mention that you, Neville, and Hermione drugged two fellow students and impersonated them? Or perhaps you dosed him with Veritaserum? God knows no one would believe that Draco told you willingly nor that he would be so careless as to talk about it outside of the confines of his common room. Mr. Malfoy might get a fine, lose a few possessions, but you three could get suspended if not outright expelled. Ron's face paled. I never thought of that. Hermione was so enraged by this eventuality that she could do no more than glare daggers at Ron. It's highly unlikely Malfoy's father will either, Neville said finally. I mean, purebloods like him are more used to bribing their way out of trouble than using the law to their advantage. Still, Harry said thoughtfully. It might be nice to know you're in the right for once. I'll mention it to Draco in the morning. But Harry. Ron sulked. Do the words drugged and impersonated mean nothing to you? Harry shook his head. Technically, I suppose I'm an accomplice, but I could just bribe my way out of any trouble. You wouldn't, Hermione told him sternly. I know, Harry agreed. But I could. That doesn't matter anyway, Neville spoke up. Because before we left, Draco confessed to being the heir of Slytherin. But he's not, Harry protested. Hermione sighed indulgently. Look Harry, I know he's your friend, but he's also Dash. A cold-blooded little sociopath. Ron suggested. Seriously overcompensating for something? Neville tried. The victim of a severe father complex agitated by the rumors about his parentage that have been circulating for the last year and a half. Harry offered. No. Hermione glared. I was going to say Dash. It doesn't really matter what you were going to say, Harry told her, deciding not to even bother. We've already had this conversation. Draco's not even a parcel mouth, he can't be Slytherin's heir. But he confessed. Ron whined, looked like someone had told him Christmas was cancelled. And so was breakfast. He's also 12 and an idiot, Ron, Harry told him, annoyed. Well, can't argue with you there. Ron mused. Can the fact that he's an idiot be his motivation for opening the chamber? No it can't. I've already told you that Voldemort's the one who's opening the chamber and he's using a supposedly dead Dash. And we've had this conversation before, too, Hermione cut him off. No one actually believes that, you know. Luna does, Harry said defensively and not a lit irritated at being cut off. Well, Luna's. Hermione paused, searching for the right word. Luna. No, really, Hermione? Harry rolled his eyes. And there's no point arguing about this. Draco's too much of a child to realize that he shouldn't be going around claiming credit for something like this even if he were responsible, which is not, by the way. You are too much children to realize what he's doing and why, and I can't make you understand that. Hermione bristled at being called a child and opened her mouth to fire off an angry retort. Harry didn't let her. As I mentioned earlier, Draco's confession falls under the category of hearsay and he will most definitely deny it if Dumbledore asks him about it. Basically, all you can do is stalk him until you're satisfied he's innocent. As we've all realized that someone could order an attack in advance, having an alibi means nothing, so you're not going to let up until I catch him. Wait, you? Neville asked. Of course, Harry grinned good-naturedly. I've been told that I have a saving people thing. And Professor Lockhart's assured me that the dramatic killing of Basilisk would be a riveting bestseller. Chapter 22. After Ron, Hermione, and Neville had gone to bed, Harry stayed down in the common room, waiting for Sirius to call. Sure enough, after 20 minutes, his mirror flashed to indicate that Sirius was trying to reach him. He removed the silencing spell from the mirror and waited to see what his godfather had to say. You sent me a bloody mirror, was the first thing out of Sirius's mouth. Well, hello to you too, Sirius. I haven't seen you since Halloween. I'm fine, thanks for asking. How have you been? Harry asked politely. Don't get cute with me, Harry, Sirius growled. You sent me a mirror for Christmas. Don't get pissy with me, Sirius, Harry said, imitating Sirius's indignant tone. You really need it. When was the last time you shaved? I've been on the run. I got you a wand, Harry pointed out. You made me look like an 11-year-old girl first, Sirius shot back. Harry shrugged, trying valiantly to suppress his grin at that very interesting mental picture. What can I say, Sirius? Sacrifices must be made. I didn't see you making any sacrifices. Sirius said moodily. You contraire, I am now scarred for life, Harry insisted. You don't look scarred, Sirius countered as Harry lost the fight to keep his face impassive. Yeah, well. Harry trailed off. I thought I should probably warn you before I actually do it, but Mrs. Fix sent me one of her Kneazle kittens and I'm having one of the school owls deliver it to Filch tomorrow at breakfast. Sirius froze, mouth agape in horror. Harry, you. He shook his head, unable to continue. Harry rolled his eyes. Spare me the histrionics, please. What histrionics? I am genuinely horrified and appalled here, Sirius huffed indignantly. What were those muggles thinking when they raised you? I sure wish we had a less active child protection service so we could beat the magic out of our freak of a nephew. Harry suggested impishly. You know what I mean, Sirius said impatiently. Harry nodded. Indeed I do. That's why I answered your question to the best of my abilities. Don't play dumb, Harry, it doesn't suit you, Sirius sniped. Hey, if you're going to be like that, then fine. Where's my Christmas present? Harry demanded, crossing his arms. You can't complain about what I got you and then turn around and not get me anything. I'm a fugitive of the law. I don't exactly have the resources to get you anything, Sirius said defensively. Bull, Harry said dismissively. You have a wand, don't you? Anything I can make with a wand, you can make, Sirius pointed out. Given my little prison stint, you technically have more years of using magic on you than I do. Details, Harry waved his hand impatiently. And what I meant was, you can use glamour and don't even pretend that the goblins care that you're a fugitive. You could have easily gotten me something. Well, maybe I would have been more receptive if you'd agreed to meet up. I haven't seen you in months, after all, Sirius pouted. That's because, your fugitive status notwithstanding, I'm off at boarding school. That's kind of how these things work. You're just going to have to get used to that. I am used to it, Sirius muttered. But you're the only other person who even understands what's going on with the future and about the Horcruxes and who knows that I'm innocent. I have to use a bloody glamour anytime I go anywhere. Oh, so you can use a glamour to go places but not to buy me stuff. Typical. You are, without a doubt, the worst godfather ever, Harry declared dramatically. Hey, I ate rats for you, Sirius countered. Harry made a face. Damn, you've got me there. But seriously, Sirius, and so help me, don't you dare make another stupid pun about that. What I said was completely unintentional. I wanted to meet up but it just wouldn't be very feasible. We don't want there to be any chance of anyone seeing you. We couldn't even meet at the Shrieking Shack since you destroyed it, Harry told him. That was an accident. Sirius protested. But it's still gone. And very symbolic, if you think about it. But anyway, you wouldn't even be on the run if you just agreed to dash. We've been over this, Harry, Sirius interrupted. It's just not happening. The only way I step foot in that godforsaken house again is if you drag my cold, dead corpse through the doorway. Isn't it a bit redundant to say cold and dead? Harry asked. Seeing as how they mean the same thing. I know that, I'm just being thorough, Sirius assured him. And besides, anything I can buy for you dash. I know, Harry said tiredly. I can buy for myself. You're really not getting this whole spirit of Christmas thing, are you? You spend 12 years in bloody Azkaban and we'll see just how much Christmas spirit you have, Sirius countered. You had plenty of Christmas spirit before you fell through the veil, Harry pointed out. You fall through the veil and dash Sirius paused. Oh. Well maybe I'm just depressed because Remus still thinks I'm evil. You have me, Harry told him. There was silence from Sirius's end. Sirius. What? Sirius asked innocently. Of course I have you. How about, to make it up to you, I teach you how to be an animagus. As the only child of the Marauders dash. Actually, Remus had a son, too, Harry interjected. His name is Teddy. Sirius looked a little put out. Fine, he rallied. Then as the first child of the Marauders, it is truly pathetic that you managed to go this long without becoming one. That's a nice sentiment, Harry said pleasantly. But I had that mastered by the time I was 21. Really? Sirius asked, looking extremely excited. What are you? Harry smirked. Now, Sirius. That would be telling. Hey, Draco, glad I caught you, Harry said, slapping the Slytherin in question on the back. Draco eyed him warily. Does this mean you're talking to me again? Again? I never stopped talking to you, Harry assured him. Are you sure? Because I seem to recall you admitting you were avoiding me sometime in November, Draco said casually. Really, Draco, you do say the strangest things, Harry said, shaking his head. Now why would I go and do a silly thing like that? Avoid me? Draco asked. Well, actually, I meant admit to avoiding you, but let's go with that. Why would I avoid you, Draco? Harry asked, the epitome of innocence. Because you were spreading rumors about my parentage. Draco suggested. There are rumors about your parentage? Harry asked, looking shocked. Oh, come off it, Draco said, irritated. I know you know. I know you started them. If you say so, Harry said, sounding dubious. What is it that you wanted? Draco asked testily. I wanted to remind your father that after someone searches your property they cannot research it without a warrant and they cannot get that without what I like to call due cause. I would like to further remind you that hearsay does not qualify nor does drugging several students, impersonating them, and overhearing any statements you may have made about your drawing room. Draco just stared at him. What? Have a good day, Harry said cheerfully as he ran off, leaving Draco shaking his head in confusion and growing paranoia behind him. The next month and a half passed quite uneventfully. Only 3 people had been petrified, Zacharias Smith again, Randolph Burrow from Ravenclaw, and Cormac McLagan, who Harry was even more tempted to leave petrified than he was Zacharias, and all had been quickly revived. Despite the fact that Sirius called him on the mirror at least twice every week, Harry still refused to tell him what animagus form he had. He didn't really have a reason for it, although it was fun watching Sirius jump through hoops trying to analyze him and figure out what animal he was even though he thought it was painfully obvious. But then he'd had Hermione spend days analyzing why after he completed the transformation, so maybe that was why. Valentine's Day he decided would be, without a doubt, one of the worst days of his life with Lockhart running the show and the look some of the barely pubescent girls were giving him. It also made him feel something like a pervert because he was so much older than them, even though he didn't look it and wasn't actually doing anything to encourage their affections. Quite the contrary, he kept trying to reject them, but they kept misinterpreting that to mean he was playing hard to get. Needless to say, Luna and Hermione were the only girls he felt completely comfortable around in the days preceding the 14th. On Valentine's Day itself, Harry realized that he'd worked himself up into such a panic that he would probably snap and start hexing anyone coming within a 5-foot radius of him and decided, for everyone's sake, to just stay in bed. It wasn't like he was going to miss anything with all of those dwarfs and hormones floating around. Harry was especially grateful that he chose to do this when the dwarfs began a 15-hour siege on his fortunately fortified dormitory door starting at 9 that morning. After reinforcing the protections he'd cast and adding a couple of silencing spells, it really didn't bother him all day, although his roommates were a bit disturbed when they came back that evening. Apparently it was weird that he had an entire army full of determined message deliverers. Determined, but clearly only within reason as they stopped the minute it hit midnight. Apparently dwarfs don't do overtime. In March, Harry and Luna attended the loud and raucous party the Mandrakes were throwing in Greenhouse 3 and it honestly had to be one of the most bizarre experiences Harry ever had. Particularly since he could barely hear anything due to the spells he and Luna had cast on themselves so they wouldn't be knocked out and or killed by their hosts. It certainly made for an interesting editorial, though, and some strange pictures. It struck Harry as slightly odd that the Mandrakes were almost fully matured, but nobody really seemed to care as Harry kept the supply of Mandrake potion on coming whenever anybody needed it. Before Harry knew it, it was time to choose the classes for 3rd year. And despite what Hermione may have thought, Harry did think long and hard about his choices. You want to take Muggle Studies, Care of Magical Creatures, and Divination? Hermione asked incredulously, glancing at his sheet. Yep, Harry nodded. I can't believe you, Hermione said, shaking her head in disbelief. Why not? Harry asked. You're taking them. He paused. Among other things. Hermione looked startled. How did you know about Dash? You totally planning on using the time turner I got you to take not only those 3 subjects but arithmancy and ancient runes, too? Harry asked innocently. Now Hermione looked outraged. Harry, that was supposed to be a secret. And how did you even know about that in the first place? Harry crossed his arms and said, not a little smugly, that's what you get for doubting my scar. Hermione looked bemused. Are you saying your scar wants an apology or something? Harry cocked his head to the side, pretending to consult with said facial disfigurement. My scar says that would be nice. Hermione raised her eyes to the heavens in a whimy gesture. If I do, will you not tell anyone else? You know, you guys can stop acting like we're not here anytime now, Neville told them. Yeah, and we are perfectly capable of keeping secrets, Ron added. Harry ignored them. I promise. Another pause. And so does my scar. Even if I believed your scar could talk, you're the only one who understands it. Hermione exploded. You don't know that, Harry told her crossly. Still here. Neville said. Who else can communicate with your scar then and why haven't they come forward? Hermione challenged. Well, I'm sure I don't know the answer to either question. I'm not my scar's keeper after all. Harry glared at Hermione, who had snorted at that. But possibly it's because they don't want anyone to think they're crazy. Because why would anyone think that someone was crazy for hearing your scar talk to them? Hermione asked sarcastically. Hey, do you want to just forget them and play chess since they won't acknowledge us? Ron asked. Why not? Neville shrugged. See how they like it. My scar is still waiting for that apology, Harry reminded her. Fine. Hermione threw her hands up in the air. I'm sorry if I offended your scar by implying that it is not sentient and as such cannot actually speak to anyone. And for thinking that even if it could, it still wouldn't be psychic because that is really pushing the limits of what I'm willing to believe, even in a magic school. My scar thanks you and, what's more, I thank you, Harry said gravely. My scar really wouldn't shut up about how angry and hurt it was whenever you were in the room. I do have a question for you, though. If you don't believe anyone can be psychic, what's the point of taking divination? I may not believe in it, but I don't know for sure that it's not real and I'm anal enough that I can't stand the possibility of missing out on what might turn out to be a completely legitimate learning experience, Hermione answered promptly. Harry laughed at that. Hermione, regardless of your opinions of the validity of the art of divination as a whole, even the most blatant frauds will tell you that you can't learn divination. You either have the inner eye or you don't. Are you saying I don't have this inner eye? Hermione asked, her voice dangerous. Clearly she didn't appreciate being told she wasn't good enough to take a class, even one she didn't particularly want to take but was taking more as a matter of principle. I'm just saying that if you did, you probably would have had some indication by now, Harry said delicately. Like with you and your scar? Hermione sniffed. By that do you mean do I think I'll be good at the subject? Harry asked. I think I'll be phenomenal. Partly because of his incredibly BS abilities. But something you should know is that a common characteristic of seers is that the stronger inner eye you possess, the more, well, strange you tend to be. So you would be an expert, Hermione said innocently. And probably Luna too. But does that mean that our professor would also be a bit distant? Professor Trelawney has a very strong inner eye but she sometimes tries to push it, force future knowledge that she needs to just let come naturally. I have no doubt that she'd have a lot more visions if she'd just let it come naturally, Harry confided. How would you come to that conclusion if she never has? Hermione was intrigued. Because real seers never remember their prophecies, Harry explained. Some higher power or whatever is speaking through them. Then how do you explain that you remember everything you see? Hermione countered. Easy. I'm not psychic, my scar is, Harry said simply. Then how would you be good at divination? Hermione asked. I have 24-hour access to my scar, first of all. Secondly, when it comes to divination class, a lot of the time you have to fake it, no matter how talented you are. Then why take the class, if you seem to be convinced it won't do you any good? Hermione asked, baffled. Because it's an easy Ron supplied, looking up from the chessboard. Because I'd like an opportunity to further hone my BS abilities and it won't be that difficult, Harry said. Am I right, Ron? Ron, who had just said something to that effect literally 10 seconds before Harry remembered he existed, just gaped at him in horror. Neville patted him on the arm sympathetically. Fine, don't answer me, Harry said, annoyed. I don't care. Why would you want to do that when you can take something useful like arithmancy or ancient runes? Hermione demanded. Because I know nothing about either of those subjects and I would actually have to work at it and quite frankly I just don't feel like it, Harry replied. I can understand taking care of magical creatures. That might not come into play with whatever you want to do once you graduate, but surely you will, at some point, encounter some magical creatures and it would help if you knew the basics when dealing with them. On the other hand, Muggle studies. Hermione couldn't believe it. Why not? Harry said again. You're taking it. I'm only taking it because I think it would be fascinating to study Muggles from a wizarding perspective, Hermione pointed out. Since you won't even try something new, I think I can safely say that that's not your motivation. So why are you really taking it? Even easier. Hermione threw a book at him. What? You're impossible, you know that. Hermione grumbled. But you love me anyway, Harry grinned. Only because you lured me into friendship under false pretenses. Hermione insisted. Harry's eyebrows wrinkled in confusion. It wasn't often he was confused since his return to the past and he didn't like the feeling. False pretenses? You didn't tell me you were crazy. That's because I'm not, Harry protested. Your scar says otherwise, Hermione responded. Oh, so now you can hear my scar. By your own logic, that makes you crazy, Harry shot back. I think they're both crazy, Ron offered. For once, I agree, Neville said. Why are they ignoring us again? Ron asked, still a little offended. I don't think they're doing it on purpose. I just think that they're both the type of people who get so caught up in arguments they just don't notice anything outside of what they're saying, Neville suggested. Really? That's so weird. Neville shrugged. You and Hermione are the same way, you know. Ron's eyes bulged out. Really? Neville nodded, thinking back on all the times Harry had been off doing God knows what and he had been left alone with a bickering Ron and Hermione and thoroughly ignored. Was it any wonder, really, he reached out to Ginny? Growing up with 6 older brothers, she understood perfectly.